And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Tom Vasel.
Hey folks, today we're going to be taking a look at a game called Asgard's Chosen. This is a clever game of land manipulation and deck manipulation. It says for 1 to 4 players. You can play competitively or cooperatively. I'm going to be taking a look at it today as basically a competitive game because yes, what you're doing in this game is you are kind of in the Bronze Age of Asgard, and you have all these different weird mythological creatures, and there's these gods who are making demands upon you and giving favors to you, and you need to appease them. Now, when I first heard about this, I thought that it was a deck builder game, but it's certainly more than that. Let's take a look. Now, my purpose here is not to explain the game in great detail, because it is fairly complex. The rulebook itself isn't, I guess it's not that long, it's 17 pages, but there's a lot going on in this game, and if you go into it thinking, oh, it's a deck builder, what have you, you will be sorely mistaken. I just want to give you kind of an idea of how it plays. The map is modular. There's different pieces that can be formed here. These white pieces are cities that can be placed into circles. The game comes with some ideas for an introductory game, so you can see that I've set up here for the 4-player introductory game, so you can see how that is set up. And each player has a bunch of control markers of their color. They also have 2 pieces, a male and a female piece of their color, and these are your leaders, and you'll be starting the game putting these leaders in different spots. You can put them in a terrain, you can put them in one of these magic circles, you can put them in a city, and players are going to have this. Now, the goal of the game is to appease several gods, and you can decide how many gods you need to appease on your turn. You're going to have a deck of 10 of them, and you're going to start with those 10 cards as your deck. You also have some starting items that you pass around. Each person gets a starting item, like I might get Scotty's bow, or the Raskovnik, or the Acerbot, or the Abserbot. I'm not very good at pronouncing all these different names. So you'll have one of these, and you're trying to appease these gods. Now let's take a closer look at them. Gods are going to be in your deck, and you're going to be playing them for several things. You'll be using them sometimes for recruitment, which, if you can think of it as like a buying power to get other cards, that's what this top number is. Each turn you can play one god for its favor, and it gives you a special ability that you can use. For example, this one lets you muster the top creature from the barrows with no terrain restrictions. Normally you have to be in a specific terrain. Here you can get a town item. This one lets you move a hero anywhere you want on your turn. This gives +1 to all your attacks. This gives one of your heroes +3, but you cannot attack with the other one. So each of these gives you a special ability, and you can pick one of them at the beginning of your turn as your special ability. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to appease these, to take them out of your deck, and each one has a different requirement. This one you need 5 or more control markers. Currently on the map, remove 2. So if you have 5 or more control markers on the map, you take 2 of them off, and you place this guy in front of you, put a control marker on him to show that you have fulfilled and appeased him, and then you go on. And maybe, let's say you're playing a game and you have to appease 5 of the gods from your hand. Like here, this guy's odd. Both of your heroes have to be currently vanquished. So you have to have both of them basically lost, or you need to banish 3 items, or remove 2 town control markers. So each of the different gods has a thing. So they're kind of the start of a game, in a sense, we're using for the favors, but they're also the end to appease them. Now, what players are going to be doing in this game is they're going to be recruiting different types of creatures. Different creatures have a recruitment cost down in the corner. They have a power. This is used to buy other cards, but it's also used to attack. And if you notice, there's a little tiny +1 there. That's because when this gentleman, the elves here, when they're in the forest, they get a +1. Just like the dwarfs, when they're in the mountains, will get a +1. And there's all sorts of different benefits that the characters will have. The Mamunas here get their 3, but they're +2 in the bog. At the same time, they're absolutely worthless in the opposite type of terrain. So for example, you can see that type of terrain up here in the corner. These guys are terrible in the hills, while the Svartalfars are terrible in the swamp. Okay, so you have different creatures, and let me just show you some of the different creatures. Creatures have different special abilities. Many of them will be able to attack, and you're going to be using these basically to move your leaders around and take control of different territories. As I said, much of this revolves around your leaders. On your turn, you'll be moving your leaders, and if you have control of areas, you can move through those areas freely, but once you go to an area that you don't control, you'll have to either fight some neutral forces from that area, or if someone else's control mark is there, you have to fight some random forces and them, and you also might have to fight that character, especially if they have one of their leaders there, then one of you is going to be vanquished and kicked out on their side, not being able to go anymore that turn. Now, the different types of terrain that this board is made up of affect the battle. You'll draw random creatures from decks, and if they're in their home terrain, well, that's too bad. You're going to be fighting some guys who are difficult, and at the same time, if they're in the opposite terrain, then you don't have to worry about them. And so there's a lot of fighting and playing cards and using their special abilities, like the different cards that I showed you, the different creatures. There's 2 different decks of creatures. You'll start with one, the gold bordered cards, and then move on to silver bordered cards when the gold ones run out. And as the game progresses, you will be recruiting different cards that are here. And you'll recruit from the bottom row, and then the top ones move down, and you can only recruit normally creatures in where you are at right now so that you can get that specific type of terrain. When you're mustering these creatures, sometimes you will draw event cards, and these event cards will have different things happening. So a turn is going to take place like this. The first thing you'll do each turn is you will play a god card for the favor part of it. You don't have to, but each player has a chance to do that. Then players also can play cards with charm icons, which are like special ability cards. Then there's the campaign phase, where one player will move one of their heroes and maybe make an attack and do something around that with everybody else. Another person will, and everyone else will do that. Then you'll move your second hero. Being in different spots will give you benefits. If you're, like, for example, here in a wind, any spot that has a wind symbol, you'll get bonuses on. You can get free creatures if you go to the fairy rings, which are these 2 spots. You draw extra cards if you're in one of these spots that say +2. Cities are useful to get items, and also they're very useful. They're stronger defensive positions. And so you'll be doing all that in the campaign phase and fighting. And then there's a mustering phase where you'll be getting creatures from the face-up ones in this area called the Tish. Then there's a renewal phase where you discard cards that you've played, and you'll fill your hand back up and go to the next turn. Much of the game is all about the battles that will occur as you turn over random enemies from the pile, plus enemies that the defender will play, plus enemies that the attacker plays, resolving special abilities and see who wins the battle, and see who gets able to put in a control marker of their color. My first play of Asgard's Chosen was disappointing because I went into it as a deck building game, and everything else seemed to get in the way of that, and that was kind of like, Then that was the first play. Then going into it more, I realized that it was closer, at least in feel, to Mage Knight, the board game, which is a game that's very critically acclaimed, and you have characters, and there is a lot of similarities to that. As you move around, you will fight random monsters, you'll use different monsters in yourself, and you build your deck, but it's not like, oh, let's build the most efficient deck. No, it's like, who can I recruit to my thing? If you think about it, it works in a very strong thematic way, where you're going through the land, and, oh, you druids, help me here, elves, come join me, let's go fight. And then there's different things. Now, let's talk about the things I like. I think the idea of using the gods for special ability over the course of a round is very interesting. Which one are you going to use? You often have multiple ones you want to use. The +1 in battle can be a really big thing, but at the same time, maybe I want to draw more cards. And then appeasing them, I think, is a neat mechanic, because that's certainly, it's not a quick get to a specific goal. You have 10 different goals that you're trying to meet. Which one of those goals would you like to meet the most efficiently? Now, where does the game stumble? By far, it halfway stumbles on the components. Now, let me explain that. I think the artwork in this game is phenomenal. Really excellent artwork. And the card design is pretty good. I say pretty good because the terrain colors are, I'm telling you, even after multiple plays, I still get confused as sometimes which terrain goes with which thing, and what does that terrain mean. And the terrain pieces, the board itself, it's ugly. It really is. I mean, when you take a look at that board and you're moving around your heroes, which are essentially meeples and pawns, and you're dropping cubes, and you're looking at this just really not well drawn terrain. It doesn't jump out at you at all. You know, if you're going to play this game, which requires a strong thematic flavor, it is. It's not a numbers game. It's not. It's a strong thematic game, and this board just kind of sucks that out of it. You look at it, and you're like, oh, it doesn't look that good. So that's kind of a big negative. I mean, the artwork is great, having all these different creatures, but the functionality between that and the board and looking at this and saying that. Now, the game is heavy, a lot heavier than I expected, actually. I didn't like it, all right? And I'm being very cautious here to not say that it's a bad game, but for me, it just wasn't one that struck my fancy. Part of that was the battles felt really convoluted. I would draw cards and I would check and say, okay, is this terrain here? Okay, what terrain matches? What bonuses do I have? What bonuses do you have? Okay, I'm going to play this card because I played these characters. I'll get these bonuses and these special abilities. And that was a lot for me to just put a cube on the board. And you say, well, that's the whole point, to put those cubes on the board and be able to accomplish this in a piece guides. You're right, and that is very much the truth of it. But I just felt like a lot of the game, it was too much. Now, granted, okay, I understand that we're not trying to, every game can't be like Dominion where it's just efficiency. Okay, I don't want that. I don't mind games that are big and overflowing. Mage Knight is one that's very similar where you're getting cards. But in that one, Mage Knight has an advantage because in one, everything just has this strong thematic flair, the pieces and all the components. But also, battles weren't as... This game just seemed like the battles were awfully complex. And remembering all these odd terms, the skitch and the abyss and all these things... It's great. If you love this mythology here, you're going to really like this because this is a I'll give them a lot of points for this. This is a mythology that's not often touched. Mostly we're always dealing with Greek mythology or Roman mythology. To come here and take a look at the Norse mythology, that's good. But because we're using a mythology that I'm not used to, there's so many different terminologies running around. The text on the cards is pretty small, so you're always constantly looking at it. There's events going off. It's just almost too complex for its own good. Now again, this is my opinion. Not everyone I played with disliked the game. Some folks liked it, but it's a much slower plotting style game than I was expecting. I was expecting it to be quicker and faster. Then once my expectations went away and I played it again, I still wasn't just pleased. So, the positives, great artwork, strong theme works really well. The negatives, I thought combat was too convoluted. There's so much going on to keep track of who's appeased what favors of what gods and what cards am I playing, what bonuses. I just felt like there was too much going on at any given point. And, well, and the board's just terrible. So, I don't know. I think the audience for this game is going to be small, really, because I don't think there's that many people who want that heavy of a fantasy-style game. But if it even somewhat interests you, you should certainly give it a try because there is a lot here involved. Then, well, you might just love it. But for me, not one I want.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.
Shut the door.
There.